So, hello everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Getting Into the Weeds series. My name is Tim Molcomb, and I'm the vegetable specialist with Perennia. Hugh is here today as well to make sure things run smoothly. Today, we're going to be talking about optimizing on-farm efficiency with a focus on labor, time, and equipment. And we're talking to two local farmers, Angus Ells and Alan Melvin. So this episode is going to be more of a roundtable discussion, so please get involved and ask questions at any time. Firstly, all participants will have their audio and video turned off during the webinar, but please ask questions, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Keep an eye on the chat function as some links might be posted there during the event. And for any CCAs out there looking for CEU points, you can scan this QR code. We'll be posting the code at the end of the event as well. So if you don't have your phone right now, don't fret. And when I send out an email after this, I'll link the code as well. So there should be lots of opportunities to make sure you get your points. So this is the third episode in this year's series. Hopefully you caught the first two. If not, don't worry, they'll be uploaded to YouTube soon for your viewing pleasure. And I just want to plug next week's episode, the last in the series. So don't forget to sign up for that. Trials and Tribulations of On-Farm Plots. It'll be with Caitlin Condon and Sunny Murray. Hopefully this far into the series, you know who Perennia are. We're Nova Scotia's provincial development agency, with a mission to support growth, transformation, and economic development in our agriculture, seafood, and food and beverage sector. If you're interested in signing up for more webinars, such as next week's end of the series with Caitlin and Sunny, then you can click on the Learning tab on the right of the website to see a list of upcoming events. Okay, without further ado, let's get into the weeds with Angus and Alan and have a chat about on-farm efficiency. I will say that whilst it's important, it's not necessarily a sexy topic. So we tried to find two of the sexiest farmers around to make up for that. So welcome, Angus and Alan. And you two. There we go. Okay, so welcome, Angus and Alan, and thank you for being part of this discussion. If I could get you both to just introduce yourselves and your farm and just talk about what kind of operation you run, and then we'll go from there. Angus, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I feel like I shouldn't say anything, Tim, because there's no way we can live up to that introduction. So we could just stop right now. So I work for Bragg Lumber, have for 25 years, and I look after carrot farming. So really the context today that I'll speak from is our carrot farms. So we farm about 2,000 acres of carrots a year now. That's been growing over the last few years, but we grow 1,700 acres in the valley, about 300 acres in Colchester County. In Colchester County, we do it largely on long-term leased farms and rented land. In the valley, we have a 3,000 acre owned land base. We long-term lease another 500 to 600 acres. So we do it on our own land base and basically a 4-year rotation. And then we work with about a dozen other farms to trade land with, to rent out our rotation years. And so that's what we do. Very much a mechanized farm. So everything that we do really revolves around good equipment operators and a range of mechanized equipment to get the job done.
Great, thank you. And Alan?
Sure. So I'm Alan Melvin, I guess a 6th generation farmer here in the Annapolis Valley. We grow about 130 to 140 acres of vegetables a year, and those are cauliflower, green onions, leeks, cabbage, and romaine lettuce for the purposes of romaine heart production. So unlike Angus, we're very, given our production, we're very labor intensive in terms of each production unit that we put out and produce. So we're always looking at how we can minimize and mitigate some of that labor costs first and foremost, but also I mean, there's a lot of other considerations we'll get into today, but that's one of our high points of focus. So yeah, that's in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. And am I right in that you don't rent that much land? Most of the land base is owned by you?
Yeah, that's right. We do some land swapping, certainly with other farmers to get some rotation, but we've got about 500 acres of our own land that we keep in rotation and grow our own crops on. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So yeah, it's definitely some differences between the two of you. You know, Angus deals with a lot of other farmers, swapping land a lot, and a lot of mechanization. So first and foremost, both of you have been farming for a long time. And how do you go about the process of identifying inefficient operations that are negatively hurting the farm? Angus, again, I guess I'll ask you again.
I think part of it, Tim, is intuition. Is thinking about that in preparing for this, and as farmers, we're such generalists that we're looking over our farms every day. We're very close to them. So I think just plain intuition plays a large part in it. What I found from that is intuitively, you know, something's not right. Then how do you dive a little deeper? And for me, I think that the best way has been cash flow budgeting. So we do a monthly cash flow budget, and we really review that each month. So we'll compare year-to-date actual, year-to-date budget, and last year, and that allows you to really see if something's not following from where you were. So I think that's probably the start of the drill down process.
Great. Okay, and you beat me to the next question as well, which was what metric do you use to view efficiency on your farm? So for you, it's cash flow budgeting. And Alan, I'd like to ask you the same question. You know, what metric do you use to quantify efficiency on your farm? And then through that metric, how do you identify inefficient operations?
Yeah, so we're very much, I would say, financial. I mean, every farm, you're looking to make a profit at the end of the day, and so I think most would analyze the financial side of and drill down into what are perceived as, to Angus's point, what feels like a weak point or a point that there can be some improvement. So we often start with the financial side, and wages being a big line item for us. We look at the processes that are in place and how we can improve those, and if there's maybe mechanization or some other just process change in general that we can implement there to streamline. But in terms of specific metrics, we similar to Angus, you know, you're looking at your year to date or year over year financials, but then we also look at on our by each crop, we'll do contribution margin analysis and things like that to say, you know, we might be doing a bit better financially wise on one side versus another, and if we have an indicator of a weak point, we'll drill into that a little bit closer and say what can we do differently on that crop, on that vegetable. So those are kind of the areas that we start with, and then, you know, we also consider there's a financial aspect, but then we also consider, well, can we get a better quality out of a change? So if we can get better quality, then hopefully down the line we can also realize a financial benefit to that too. So to try and give our customers a better product.
Oh, that's great. So obviously it's profit driven for both of you, but balancing that with changing climates and changing markets must be a real challenge. So once you've identified an area that could be optimized, how do you go about creating an efficiency goal? Is there a set process you would use, or does it completely depend on the situation? Alan, do you want to go first with that?
Great question. So we would look at, just see my father popped up on the screen here. So maybe he's going to
watch what you say.
Yeah. So we would look at, it depends on what kind of improvement we're making, but you might look at production units per acre. Cases, in our case, it would be cases per acre that we're putting out. If we're looking at, so a yield goal, there may be labor savings. So, you know, at the end of the day, your cost per acre of labor as well. So we're looking at different, depending on what efficiency we're targeting, it's going to depend on what kind of metric we look at, and you know, you have to kind of customize to those specific goals, I guess.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, Angus?
Yeah, I'd agree with Alan, and I think too, it depends on, you know, efficiency is a big word, a big topic. So sometimes you've got something very specific. So you're in the field, you're irrigating, you've got a young crew, and you just see a few things going wrong, and it's just you can deal with that in the field very quickly, logically, and you know, you can have an instant win, so to speak. They've probably got an easier work day, and you're getting the job done better. So, you know, that's efficiency on one level.
Mhm.
Then in our farm like Harvard, and I'll talk about this a little bit in a case study later on, but when you get into more complex issues where you've got multiple operators, you know, and sometimes contractors involved in your own farm, then it gets more complex. And I've tended over the years to take those kind of as almost a project approach, and you've identified it, then you just got to take it aside, put a simple little project around it, and with some metrics, and just follow that through. Short time frame, usually a year, and that can be pretty successful too. But it's really at the other end of efficiency, the scale of efficiency issues.
Mhm. No, that's interesting. And the idea of complexity brings me to the next question, actually. So I'm curious if there's a time, you know, farms are very complex systems, and it's hard to sometimes see the end result when you're pushing forward with something. So is there a time that either of you have tried to optimize something on your farm and it has not gone to plan? You know, like are there any great mistakes that we could learn from through you?
There'd be so many, I can't. I'm getting old, I'm forgetting them, which could be a good or bad thing. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, Tim. I mean, but I think the biggest thing for me has been, you have that thought process, I got to fix that, but you're so busy that you can't really focus on it. And every day, I mean, efficiency gains are going to go along with getting the job done. We've already got a crop plan, and we're going forward. One of the great things in what Alan and I do, and what we do as vegetable farmers, is we get an off season. We've got a reset. You know, like this is really reset season. So I think my failures have been in not following through on something, not really putting enough. You got to keep it simple, but I've found over the years, if you can really this time of year sit down with your team and to really be successful, you've got to say, who's responsible for this? How are we going to measure it and bring it home?
That's great. Thank you. Alan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I would generally agree with Angus. Like every best laid plan is just that, a best laid plan, and you're always going to have curveballs come out of them. And we do, to Angus's point, we have the benefit of a reflection time that we can kind of take away and debrief things. And you know, I'll talk about one of our projects later on as a case study, but you would have had a best laid plan, and then we evolved it in year 2 and continued to evolve it to optimize it. But I wouldn't say that's a failure by any means, definitely not. But certainly you're always going to have curveballs that come at you that you have to then kind of consider and deal with. So it's always evolving, I guess, from an efficiency standpoint, and you're always looking for how to improve the next piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. So, and both of you have been at this a long time, and I'm curious if you've noticed any common themes. So obviously every farm is different, but are there specific areas of farm operations that have the greatest scope for optimization? And what I mean by that, I guess, is if you were to start fresh or take over an existing operation, where would you focus first?
I can start.
It's a big question. So
it is a big question. So, you know, in a perfect world, you'd have machines to do everything, and they'd be less capital intensive and all that. But I think in our type of farming, with our large requirement for labor as a total cost of production, you're always looking at what process is taking the most time and cost and effort, and how can we maybe not eliminate that labor, but better use that labor to greater return on that cost or that input. So for us, certainly, you look at, I think the next thing we would probably look at is, we look at lots of different things, but there's a lot of weed control and things that go into horticulture and our type of crops. So trying to mechanize or streamline those processes and cut that cost would be a big area for some farms of our nature. But yeah, it's really, it depends on it's very farm specific, I would say, and depends on how they're operating and what technologies are out there, and maybe it's just, again, process improvement that could be thought about as well. So yeah, it's very niche for each farm, I think.
Sure. And coming from a farm that has a high percentage of labor, I'm sure you would look to mechanization first to reduce that labor cost.
That's right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's lots that can't be done at this point, but the technologies are always evolving, and so you have to be aware and have your finger on the pulse of change to make the decision, figure out where the decision point is, or where the decision point tips in favor of that mechanization from a cost and overall quality and productive capacity perspective.
Great. Angus, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think obviously our farm experience is a little different between Alan and I, but it's interesting because Alan's optimizing, labor optimization, of course, has to be a key. For us, it's machinery operation, but there's a labor component to that. Over the years, we've added on care production, we've added different blueberry farms and integrate them. So I think anytime I'm looking at a new operation, or we would look at a new operation, the first thing we try to do is see if it's right sized. And often you'll let it run, but right size can look so different for different operations. And one thing, again, bringing this back to efficiency, sometimes you can't do everything yourself. So we've got some blueberry farming operations, for instance, where over half the work would be done by contractors because we're distant from that area perhaps, and there's local contractors that can do a better job. In the spring, I'm trying to roll 4 seeders and 2 hillers and get a lot of work done. Well, that's more labor and more tractors than we need for the rest of the year. So we can bring operators in from our blueberry operations if we're in April before they get busy. But another really effective way is in the valley. We've got access to some of our rotation partners that we work with who are really corn, soy, wheat growers, and they're winter wheats in the ground. They're not into corn bean time. We can get just terrific eating power from those farms with experienced operators, great equipment that we could not afford that equipment or find those skilled operators for those 2 weeks. So a lot of times when you talk efficiency, look at your farm. Are those tasks right sized? If there's a task that you only need for 2 or 3 weeks in the spring, are you going to have a whole lot of capital out? Can you find a farmer who's seen some huge efficiency wins? It's incremental cost to work for another farm at a time they're not busy, and it allows you to access more capacity. So it's almost a unique thing in the valley, the way we share land around, and now I see us sharing equipment around, and it's added a lot of efficiency and some good cash flow to farms.
That's a really good point. Why do everything yourself when there are others who you can help by sharing? And I also liked your point about not trying to do everything immediately, just waiting and looking at the farm at scale and just seeing how it operates, having a period of waiting where you can just analyze it. Okay, so we're talking about optimizing efficiency, but I wanted to ask you both a question about, are there any elements or processes that you would not change, even though they may seem inefficient? I'm thinking here to maybe a need to maintain certifications or specific growing practices. Angus, I know that you've talked about using regenerative agricultural practices, and sometimes on paper they may not seem the most efficient, but you do them for another purpose. So I was just wondering if there were any other areas on your farm that you decided to not optimize, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Tim. I think it's really around the timeline. So in regenerative agriculture, yeah, sometimes we have to put some fields further out in rotation, take them out of the carrot rotation first cycle, and that means we've got to rent land to cover that production base. But ultimately, we're doing that for a longer term goal, and I would argue that longer term goal is profit driven. It's driven by a regenerative agriculture model, which we believe is going to give us more productive soils in the future, more resistant to climate change, and we know it's the right thing to do. So sometimes you do have those overarching principles, and all your goals, your efficiency goals, your bottom line yearly profit goals have to fit into that, and it's a good discipline to do that, to say, does this fit within those longer term goals? I mean, we can't sometimes afford to have great longs. It's a question of how long can you wait sometimes, but I think one of the elegant things about crop farming is that, like Alan spoke to it, he's on a farm that's been farming a lot of that same ground for 6 generations plus. So there's a lot of stewardship involved in that, and that overarches efficiency. It's kind of generational efficiency almost, in a way, rather than yearly.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great answer. Alan, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think Angus hit the nail on the head. It's really that looking at that longer term gain over the short term return. You have to. It's all a balancing act, and so from a day-to-day process perspective, you may make decisions that don't have a direct immediate impact on the bottom line, but it's a longer term strategic plan in terms of sustainability of the farm and the land around us that we're really trying to think about. And yeah, it probably doesn't always feel great on the pocketbook in the short term, but you have to have a long-term view to be sustainable. So yeah, otherwise I think that generally speaking, any process on the farm is we're not in the business to be inefficient, so we're always analyzing how we can do things better, and it may not happen today or tomorrow, but everything's always in the back of our minds, and we're always trying to calculate how we might make changes to any aspect, really. To your point, farm safety or food security, or sorry, food safety certification. There's a lot of paperwork and a lot of data input, and so how can you streamline something like that? Like it's a necessary quote unquote evil, so to speak, but it needs to be done, and so even things like that, you're always looking to streamline and find efficiencies in.
Mm-hmm. Great, yeah, thank you. I threw that curveball in there. You both answered great. It's a really interesting discussion. So I'd like to ask you both to present your case studies now. So both Angus and Alan have a 10-minute case study on a particular aspect of their farm. And Angus, would you like to present first? And then we'll go to Alan afterwards.
Sure.
Great.
Oh, you're seeing all my. There we go. Alan will be more adept at this because he's a technologically advanced generation ahead of me, at least technologically. So yeah, I'll go through some of these a little bit quick, just because we've talked about some of these things. So the context I'm going to speak to is from our carrot farming operation. When we talk about labor and time and equipment, that's what we do. That's on a daily basis. That's what we do. So when Tim asked me about a case study, I said, what are some of the things, where are some of the efficiencies that we've had to gain over the years? And one of this is a picture of planting in the spring. We've got 3 seeder tractors and 2 hiller tractors in that one field. So we've got all that happening. And I got thinking, and we're trying to optimize all those operations. So we've got multiple operations, but at the same time, there's a whole bunch of information that we have to gather. At the end of the day, we've got to figure out how much seed we put in the ground. We've got to figure out, we've got to get those operators paid. We've got to allocate some machinery time. So there's, while those tractors are going up down the field planting carrots, there's a lot going on. And I love this term, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. It's kind of a loaded term because, I think the flip side of that is paralysis analysis. You can try to measure everything and really get yourself in trouble. But I really truly believe if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I talked a little bit ago about, how do we figure out efficiency things? And a lot of it's very intuitive. But then you've got to drill down. And so this is the way we've drilled down. So this is our carrot farming daily worksheet. And I've been working on farms for over 35 years, and I got reflecting on the funny thing is I've always been involved in farms that have had daily timesheets. So going back to Lyndhurst in the 80s, very simple. Worked for Dykeview for a while and got more complex, and we got into Bragg lumber. Over the last 25 years, we've kind of set up timesheets, but we've kind of evolved them. And this is our current carrot farming daily worksheet. So this is a blank sheet, and I'll go through it quickly, and then I'll look at a completed one. So up at the top, we've got a labor summary. That's really, those will go to payroll, and that's how our operators, all our employees are going to get paid. Down on the work summary, they're going to code a field. This is where it says code/field or code/equipment. We're going to code everything to a field or a piece of equipment. And on that field, we're going to code it to an activity. So really everything we do, ultimately there's an activity and there's a field, or there's an activity and there's a piece of equipment. So this is what a timesheet might look like filled out. So I've just said this is just Jane Farmer planting carrots on April 30th. So if we come down, this she worked from 6 in the morning to 8 o'clock that night. So she worked for 14 hours. She signed off on it. I'm going to sign off on it. If you come down to the work summary, you can see there's Jane's hours. So in this first little block, 605 is our seeding code. VC 2301 is a field number. She worked in that field for 2.5 hours. Seeder tractor 150, 808 is a carrot seeder. So all our operators have a list of tractor numbers and equipment numbers. Worked for 2.5 hours. And she was planting prime brilliant seed. The field's complete. 5.7 acres on her acre meter, and her seeding rate was 25.4 seeds per foot. So each block comes up with an activity. So planted another field of brilliance, then stopped and did some maintenance on the cedar, moved to another field. That field wasn't complete, so that's where she ended the day. On Jane's line, all her individual hours are going to add up to the 14 hours up top. So I'm going to get that timesheet as a supervisor, and down here you see the difference in this sheet is I've done the math and come up with the quantity of seed that was used on each one of those fields. So 3,157 M in this case. So if I get 7 or 8 of those timesheets each morning, and during seeding, I go through them. I've got to do a little bit of math to figure out the amount of seed that's used. We're not going to ask an operator to do that, but then I'm going to email those to our office, and it might take me 15 minutes to go through those timesheets. And once I've done that, and I've added those acres onto a spreadsheet to keep track of what we've planted. But once I've emailed that to our office, it goes first to our payroll clerk, and Jane gets paid for a day's work. I always say to him, most important thing. But then it gets passed to accounting, and they're going to apportion out the machine time to the individual fields, and they're going to bill out the seed. So all that's done. I don't have to think about it again after it's happened. And what we've found is our operators, and we've got operators of various ages, various literacy competencies, but they can all get familiar with it because it's intuitive. So I think you always want to have timesheets that are kind of that can be intuitive. On the backside of that timesheet is their tractor pre-op inspection. So a few years ago, we got into doing pre-ops, probably 10 plus years ago now. And at one point, we had them on a separate piece of paper. And so there's reams and reams of paper being generated each day. And so one of the reasons that we put the tractor pre-op on the backside of the timesheet is now each operator passes in one piece of paper a day, and it's got all their labor activities, machine activities, all the inputs that they've used, and then on the backside is their tractor pre-op. If you look down at the bottom of that pre-op, it says maintenance greasing performed, refer to maintenance cab card. So there's a maintenance cab card for 6215R John Deere. It's just got the daily service, weekly service, 250-hour service checks on it. It's got reference pages to the operator's manual. If you look down on, where's the good point? Not a lot of grease fitting. Grease 3-point hitch components weekly. It says 13 grease fittings. So they know how many grease fittings they're looking for. So we just put, each operator carries a copy of all these in a 3-ring binder where they also carry their timesheets, but we've also got a laminated card in each tractor. So just details everything that's done. It references hours. And so how do we know when we get to the hours? Well, we do a yearly maintenance, kind of a 40-50 point maintenance deal on each tractor. And then we just put one of these stickers in the cab. And so that way they know when it's 250, 500, when they're coming up. They'll also put those on the timesheet. So when I get the timesheets in the morning, or any of our managers get a timesheet, they can look over the equipment maintenance. The operators will put in 500-hour service coming up, or in 20 hours, and get the filters ordered, get things done. And we've just found over the years that it's just a great way to put a whole lot of information in a very simple, concise manner. So just to drill down a little further, as an example, this is kind of harvest, and carrot harvest is really two components. It's what we do in the field, and you see on the left we're loading a trailer. So all of our harvesting, or all of our trailer work, all of our hauling is done by contractors, either ourselves or external contractors. So complex operation, and what we found probably 15 years ago is we got into 3-row, actually longer than that ago. We probably solved it by 15, but once we got into 3-row harvesters, from 1-row harvesters, a whole lot of different equipment that needed to, we're dealing with different equipment, we're dealing with more complex equipment, more maintenance parts, and it took us a while to figure out. And so we weren't getting as much done as we thought we should. So this is one of those drill down exercises. We could see it when you're on at budget. As we looked at our budget, we really were over budget on carrot harvest, and it was both machine time and labor. So we said, look, let's drill down a bit. And the easiest way to do that was on the timesheet. So this is a daily harvesting worksheet. And what we did, if you look at the columns, this first look, if you look to the left, there's field hours, downtime, maintenance hours, and travel hours. So, and then we put a little block in here, downtime comments and MR comments. We did that for a year, and what we really found out was we were waiting for trucks way more than we thought we were. So that was just a whole discussion that we had to have then with our truckers, is that how do we really work together so that we're not waiting around as much for those trucks. The other part was the MR hours. And before this, we were always having this debate. Are we waiting for trucks, or is it maintenance time, or is it machine downtime? What is it? This really helped us solve all that. And a big part of it, the way we solved it, was we started carrying all the parts on the harvesters that were for typical breakdowns. So one of the most typical breakdowns we'd have would be bending a plow, bending a shear, and then we'd have to take it out, go get it straightened in a press, and put it back in. So now what we did is we just built a bracket on the side of the harvesters and carried a spare set of shears on each harvester. So now every harvester goes to the field in the morning with 2 sets of shears. The bent ones we bring home at night, stick them in the press in the shop, and away you go. The harvester operators have gotten super good at knowing what they're doing, down to electrical relays and sensor parts. So we just carried all that stuff in the compartment on the harvesters, keep it resupplied. We came up with a daily maintenance time at lunchtime when the harvesters and tractors are warm, no dew on them. That's when we stop, refuel, do all the daily service over the lunch break. So much got focused on looking at an operation, how to make it more efficient. And what I find great now is the operators. We have a little team each year just reflecting on harvest at the end. They'll come up with all kinds of things that we should be looking at and improving. So harvest has kind of evolved as acreage has grown, especially in the valley, into multiple harvesters. And with multiple harvesters in the field comes efficiencies for certainly maintenance and fueling and less car tractors per harvester. But you're generating a lot more tonnage each year. So then what we found is we had the and again, we track this on our timesheets, and what we found out is we really have to decouple harvest and trucking. So you'll see all these piles of carrots around the valley now, especially as we get later in the season. So what this has done is it's taken all the downtime of the harvester crew. So the harvester crew, typically of 5 operators, 2 harvester and 3 cart operators, their downtime is minuscule. They can account for everything in maintenance and just in field operation. And then our downtime, because inevitably they'll be waiting for trucks, but it's one loader operator. So you've got one person whose job is to load those trucks when they come, communicates with them all, sends them tins for the next field. We know that operator is going to have downtime, but he's got time to manage that whole trucking flow with it. And then the 5 harvester operators never wait for trucks anymore. So it's really worked out well. Just to finish up, I just want Tim had talked about, how do you set an efficiency goal? So this is every year we kind of come up with a little set of goals for the year. So this was 2019. And I called it control the controllables. So each year, no lost time accidents is our #1 goal every year. This year we said we want an individual goal for everybody. And then we'll usually get into an agronomic goal. And this was maximizing stands over 80% in all fields. But then we did have 2 efficiency questions that we wanted to attack. So one was irrigation efficiency. All systems run each day. So in goal setting, this kind of is taking that project aside, that efficiency project. What's the best way to do it? What I've found over the years is really come up with some SMART goals around that detail. So SMART stands for, as you see in the middle, you want a goal that's specific, you want it to be measurable, you want it to be attainable, it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be time bound. So if you look down to irrigation, we said full moisture stress is negative 60 centibars on our watermark sensors. In that situation, we want all 7 reels running daily. We're going to record that irrigation on a spreadsheet detailing all the systems and the runtime. So those are simple measurements if you set them up. And if you think of how important irrigation is, water or lack of water is really one. Field decreasing, struggling for the best word to about. I mean, it's really our #1 yield limiting factor. So is it relevant? Absolutely. Is it attainable? If we've got the equipment and we've got the operators, it should be attainable. We're going to measure it. Measure what we mean by moisture stress with the watermarks. We're going to measure the uptime, the runtime on those on a specific spreadsheet. So it's specific irrigation, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's time bound in a year. At the end of the year, we're going to review it and see how we did. So I've used that for a number of things, 5 or 6 years, and found it really effective. Just to finish off, when we talk efficiency, we kind of touched on this a little bit. So, we're all about growing a crop this year, doing as efficiently as we can, and on a daily basis, we can get really focused in on those tasks. And that's the point I'm making in the little. But we do that in the context of a whole landscape, and that landscape analogy, I think, you can kind of transfer that over to, you've got a number of people coming to work each day who have lives outside what they do at work. And there's the complexity of the people that you're working with. There's the complexity of the so really efficiency is part of what we do. It's intuitive and we have to drill down, but you never want to lose focus of that beautiful world that we have the pleasure of working in each day. Thank you.
Thank you, Angus. That was great. Great. Alan, do you want to jump in and put up your presentation?
Sure thing. All right, I think you should see it there now, Tim. Is that?
Yeah, we
it's
can
on
see
your screen?
that. Yeah.
Perfect. I'll just one other quick thing I need to change here, and then we're good. All right, so I guess when Tim asked me to speak to this topic, I kind of chose a specific project that we undertook about I guess 2 years ago now to kind of reinvent or rethink our plant propagation and planting process, transplant process. And there was a number of facets that went into that decision at the time. We had kind of a system that was at the end of its useful life from a equipment perspective. We have a labor force that has evolved since we would have started with our old system many decades ago at this point, and so we were just looking to rethink the whole process and find some efficiency and also give ourselves maybe some additional market opportunities in the process as well. So historically, so I'm going to kind of talk about our plant tape planting system and propagation that goes into that. But just to give you a quick background, we used to use a speedling system, which would have been a tray system with 200 to 276 plants per tray, depending on the cell count that we were using. And it would have had at planting time a 4-row transplanter towed behind a tractor and kind of a creeper gear speed. So 4 guys, just to put it in perspective, 4 guys on the tractor, 1 driving, or four on the transplanter, 1 driving, and then a few skips, we called them, behind the transplanter to put drop plants in any gaps they may have missed along the way. So about 7 guys in totality. And so that was the old system. And then with that labor challenge, I know we've evolved into more of an offshore labor force through the SOP program, and so having kind of, I'll say, a bit of more so part-time work in the early season became more and more difficult to manage with a workforce that comes here with the expectation of working 50+ hours a week right from day one. So we had to evolve our thinking a little bit, and so in 2021, I guess it was, we started to look at the plant tape system. So I'll just move forward here on my slides and show you a bit of what I call eye candy. And I apologize to those that normally see green. We do run generally red tractors, and there is a couple blue ones around too, but they work well for us. So here you can kind of see the plant tape system, the unit on the back. In 2022 season, we added water shoes to the system, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, or I'll try to remember to talk a bit more about that later, just to give us some fertile, or sorry, I guess water, a little bit of moisture, and then some pest pressure mitigation right on the front end as well. So that is the unit, and there'll be other pictures along the way. And so going back to the kind of the facets that thoughts that went into the decision to go this route, we looked at, first of all, the seed sowing. So historically, we would have done this in-house. Again, it was very much a part-time job at the front end of the season. Hard to work with the TFW workforce to make that happen when it's really just part-time work. And as our local labor supply kind of started to fall off the table. So under the plant tape system, all that seed sowing is done externally down in Tennessee in our situation, but there's a few locations around the world. And so that saved us bringing in labor on the front end. So there was some savings there from a labor perspective. And I should say there was also some uniformity gain in terms of that seeding process. Those machines that you saw in that previous picture, they're very refined in terms of where they drop the seed in the tray, or in the cell, I should say. It's less of a tray now, but in each individual cell, so that you get a good uniform germination on the front end, which is key for us when we're coming to harvest and making as few passes through the field as possible at harvest time. So we want as uniform a product as we can get. So then we get to the nursery side, and so the benefit here was around our utilization of our greenhouse space. So we're able to get approximately 2.5 times more plants compared to our old system into the same greenhouse. So we would see some heating cost efficiencies, a little bit of labor savings on the watering side, and then just the greenhouses are fairly high turnover in terms of replacement of plastic and things like that. So cutting some of that cost out over the longer term too. So and then there was also, from a plant perspective, a slightly shorter growing time, and because I think I have it on one of the next slides coming up, but the plant physiology and the root structure of these within these new cells, we don't have to worry about pulling out just the roots out of the tray. Whereas historically with the Speedling, you'd have to have a good root ball to get that whole core of peat to come with it. So a little bit less time in the greenhouse means we're into the field a little bit sooner. So then the next consideration was the transplanter itself. So our old system was kind of wrapping up its useful life. As I talked about, our employees, we needed quite a few employees on that system. It was slow, and we wanted something that gave us a little more capacity, I'll say. So this is a transplanter here. As you can see, there's two people on back, and in certain crops we're able to, depending on the plant spacing, we're able to even drop down to one. Sometimes my father, who's on the call, will hop in the cab, and I'll hop on back when we're on a Friday afternoon and the workers want to get to town. But it's cut our labor force, our labor requirements for this process quite dramatically. And at the same time, it's sped up our planting process as well. So we're saving on labor on a couple different fronts in terms of total man hours to get a crop in the ground. And then we also have a little bit more like I said, capacity because of those time savings to take on additional crops. So then another consideration, as I talked about a bit before, was just around plant health. So this shows the new cell on the right-hand side and the old cell structure. That isn't a cauliflower plant. It looks more like a tomato. I had a hard time finding a picture online of a Speedling cell, but that's a Speedling cell on the left. That you have to have a good root mass there to get the core out all together and into the ground effectively. So we were able to, as I said earlier, cut the days in the greenhouse by a little bit. And then more importantly, the roots in these new cells, they can grow straight down because they aren't root bound, and straight down and to some degree out as well right away. And so you get quicker establishment in the field as well. And I think we're still kind of measuring and there's a lot of variables involved, but I think we are seeing some improved plant health and growth with this new plug format too. So that's just around plant health. So that's another, it's not a direct labor savings. We talk about financial impact right away. Plant health is a little harder to measure, but it reflects in our yields on the back end. And so then just overall, we kind of looked at our payback. So again, we talked a bit earlier, Tim, about labor being one of our largest variable costs. So being able to cut back on labor, we obviously have a capital investment now that we have to carry that capital consideration, capital cost, but being able to cut back on labor There's a lot of wage pressures in terms of, wages are going up, regardless of whether somebody's on at minimum wage or above. There's upwards pressure on those wages. So we wanted to try and nip some of that in the bud, so to speak, as much as we could. Plant uniformity, as I spoke to earlier, hopefully we're reducing our labor costs on the back end in terms of the harvest and passes through the field, because every pass we have to make on cauliflower, for example, comes with additional cost and loss of efficiency. And then, as I said earlier, just the part-time labor in the shoulder season's become more and more difficult to manage and I'll say source, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then, as I noted, the old system was working towards the end of its useful life, and so the other decision point or consideration would have been a similar system, a replacement of a similar system. But those were kind of the drivers of this project specifically that went into the overall consideration. So I don't think this is just a wrap up. A couple quick points. So we've talked about the labor savings, the efficiencies of the nursery in the field, uniformity, plant health, and yield. So trying to get that better product at the end of the day and better yields were important. And then the technology as well. When we look at projects, we don't always want to be right on the cutting edge, because a lot can go wrong in those situations. There's a lot of risk involved. So we want to see some proven history with the technology, albeit maybe not within our growing region and with all of our variables, but certainly elsewhere in the world. So yeah, I think that pretty well covers it off, and happy to take any questions. Thanks.
That was great, Alan. Thank you very much. I'm just curious, is there a restriction on the cultivars you can use if the seeding is done out of house? If it's external, do you lose some control over what gets planted?
No, so we still source and supply all our own seed, and there's a lot of cross-border considerations around phytosecurity, phytosanitary type considerations, but it's all manageable. It's just another consideration we didn't have before. But we can, any cultivar we want to use, we can certainly, there's certain parameters around seed types and such, but we can generally get into that system.
Good to know. Okay, thank you. And I just had one comment about your presentation, Angus. Talking about efficiency, it's fascinating how most of your choices seem to be data driven. You were talking about the timesheets, and from that you could tell when workers were just waiting around. They didn't have an active job they were doing. Yeah. But I have to ask, do you think the sheets are done? You talked about the reams of paper. Have you considered switching to an iPad?
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable. I think it's inevitable. Our spraying is all done completely. Like we have run tablets in our sprayers. It's all hooked back to our farm management system server. We generate zero paper now in putting a sprayer in the field, doing the spraying, right straight through to billing it, either to an external customer or as a customer basis. We set all our farms up as a customer client of what we call our kind of our farming companies. So we can and we do that so we can differentiate: are we making money growing the crop, owning the land, growing the crop, or are we making money as a service company? And what we try to do is break even our blueberry and carrot farming service companies. So yeah, it's inevitable. The one thing I'll say to that is, again, we have, it was a big step for us to boil it down to one piece of paper. Mm-hmm. Like that used to be 3 and 4 pieces of paper. And some of our farm operators were really resistant to changing the way they wanted to do it. And sometimes we get new employees and they'll just look at it and just say, and I'm like, there's logic to it. We'll step you through it and we'll take you through it. And the only thing I can think, the one thing I'll say about that too, you can run over a 3-ring binder and replace it a lot easier.
That's true. Very true. Great. I think Hugh has a question for both of us. I know we're starting to run out of time here.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. So the question is, how well do the paper chains degrade in the field?
Sure. So, and I actually had a video in that presentation I forgot to show, but basically when those plants go in the ground, there's a knife that cuts those and it cuts the chain apart, and you can set your spacing on the fly through the computer. But the chains themselves, or the plugs themselves, they degrade fairly quick. I would say by the next production cycle, they'd be long gone. I have a picture on my phone that I took a picture of a romaine kind of week after week, and by like week 4, the roots are completely pushing out through that paper. So it's not really a barrier, and it's long gone. I would say by season's end. We did do, I guess to that point, we did do a bit of a test of another crop, and the plugs were still there, but they were certainly starting to decay. So even by within a couple of months, they're starting to break down.
Perfect, thank you. Well, I actually have a question for myself. One of the reasons we picked this year's theme, farming in a tight year and being efficient for this year's getting in the weeds, is the supply chain issue and higher cost, input cost. So I was wondering if any changes you guys made or were made to adjust farm operation to tackle those challenges. We are kind of running out of time, so anything you guys can give to mention, that'd be great.
A big one for us too is reducing tillage passes. So just to reduce fuel costs. So I mean, our fuel costs this year were double what we had budgeted. And our actual fuel cost 2022 was double what we budgeted, and we thought we budgeted high. So reducing, and it goes back into this long-term thing. So with like thinking in a regenerative way, we want to lighten up the tillage footprint and burn up less carbon. So a big one for us is reducing passes.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, so I think for us, it was really making sure we were optimizing every hour that our guys were, in our case of guys, our workers were on the ground. So sometimes you might have in the past, I won't call them make work projects, but you might take an extra pass of weed control, whereas this year we may have rethought that, or I would say we brought in a few less workers too, to be quite honest, to try and make sure we were maximizing everyone's time and effort. But it's a good question. It's hard to, if it was something we could do on the fly, we would probably be doing it anyway. But so you can do certain things certainly for the short term, but it sometimes has a longer term impact. So yeah, that's a great question, and something I would say we're even when we're not in a so-called tough year where there's a lot of rising costs, we're always kind of considering how we can optimize. But yeah, labor again, I mean, I keep going back to labor, but that would have been maybe one area we would have focused on more.
Yeah, and also the provincial minimum wage could increase too. That will probably affect you guys' operation too. Another question from the same grower: are raising consumer prices for fresh produce at grocery store being proportionally passed on to farmers?
Tough question, tough answer. I would say it depends on the crop or the folks are growing, and if they can pass along that value or not. You know, we're oftentimes price takers on both sides, and so you have to be able to really show your value to the in most cases the retailer, because they're your direct customer, to be able to realize that full upward pressure and costs. I would say, yeah, I'll leave it at that. I mean, it's very crop specific, arguably.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything to add, Angus?
Yeah, we're frozen, and so it's different than fresh, but we set our prices. We typically contract 12-month delivery contracts, so we'll set our price for 2023 this month, typically in February. So when you get cost pressures, you know, we're always a little behind, and as Alan says, we're price takers. So it's challenging. I would say, you know, we're just playing catch up. We're just hoping to play enough catch up quickly enough, but it's tough to keep up with inflationary cycle on something we get paid for once a year.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I have so far. Just want to say thank you to both of you. I don't see any question coming in, and it's 1 o'clock, so feel free to stick around or answer more questions, Tim.
Yeah, no, thank you, Angus and Alan. That was fantastic. I'm going to share the CCA QR code again, just for anyone who needs that. But yeah, thank you very much.